We are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into our special edition episode, I want to talk to you guys about a few quick things. If you are new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about JB Bickerstaff's introductory press conference. So make sure to comment below. Let us know what you had to think about that. Any thoughts, opinions, or even questions that you may have. We would love to know. So just make sure to comment below. And if you haven't followed us on Instagram yet, make sure to click the link in the description below this video, because we are posting updates on stuff going on with the Detroit Pistons, clips or reels, some would say, and then just letting you guys know when we're uploading on our YouTube channel. So make sure just to go follow us on Instagram. Let's get into our special edition episode. We wanted to take some time and talk about JB's introductory press conference alongside with Trajan Langdon. It was our first time getting to see what JB thinks about this Detroit Pistons team, what he envisions for the future, and what he wants to do with this young core and the new veterans. And it was cool to see Trajan Langdon get a little excited about bringing in JB as the next head coach for the Detroit Pistons, because Trajan's a very low-key guy, very soft-spoken, and just very within himself. But he seemed to have a smile multiple times introducing JB, and just seemed happy with the current situation, JB getting him to laugh a couple of times. Ryan, when watching that press conference, what were some of your first thoughts? Because I know I have a couple, but what are some of your first thoughts?
So to me, when I was listening to JB, I made the note to even mention it to my dad, but we were sitting there watching it, and when I recall back to last year with the introductory press conference for Monty, I sat there and I'm like, okay, I know Monty's a good coach. Let's see how this goes.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't really give a lot of answers, really. He
Right.
was more on the, I'm going to lay back and just tell certain things here and there, but I'm not going to tell everybody what my plans are. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But all the players were there. That was cool. But then this year, JB Bickerstaff was telling X, Y, and Z on what his plans are. But not only was it his plans per se, but it was the plans of Trajan Langdon. He made an emphasis on saying, this is what Langdon wants to do, and I'm going to help him get to that goal. Right. And just the whole, like, I sat there and I'm like in awe going, okay, I could probably listen to JB Bickerstaff talk basketball all day long, because he clearly knows what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we questioned when we were breaking down the possible candidates for this job. Is you had a laundry list: Mike Inori, Sean Sweeney, James Borrego, and then JB Bickerstaff. And we sat there and we talked, and we pretty much were like, well, JB Bickerstaff's track record, he's been interim head coach multiple times in multiple different situations, but never stuck at the job. Then gets the opportunity with Cleveland, and then it actually sticks on for 5 seasons. And then gets fired. And so then it's just his whole career pathline introductory was like, ooh, maybe not JB Bickerstaff. Maybe we go with a Sean Sweeney, or maybe we go with a Mike Inori, and even James Borrego at that. But after listening to him break down what his plans were, it made myself evident, like, he's the right guy for the job. You look at his track record of developing players. He developed Darius Garland, Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley in Cleveland, and look at where that team has gone. And then also, like, the experience he has had, not only as a head coach in the league, but also as an assistant, starting in 2004 with his dad in Charlotte, and working his way through the NBA. He's been in the NBA for a long time. And that experience, he made note of it, and what Langdon made note of, rather, is that the experience set JB Bickerstaff apart from the rest. Not that they don't have experience here and there, but he wanted somebody who's been in the position before, who has been in the position to develop a younger team. And it just, JV Bickerstaff blew everybody out of the water. And the way he talked to today, it blew me out of the water too.
So three things I want to bring up is the first thing is that he hasn't figured out his whole coaching staff yet, which I think that's fine. I want him to focus in on more looking at film, figuring out some of these players, and then kind of evaluate who he has to bring in. So that's the first thing I want to just bring up, that he hasn't brought in the whole coaching staff yet. And then the second thing is, I've always heard stories about coaching staff and front offices, flying across the country to go visit players. And it always seems like kind of like a rumor mill kind of story. But it was really cool to see Trajan Langdon address how before he even hired JB Bickerstaff, Trajan and JB traveled and flew out to San Diego to visit with Tobias Harris to talk over what it would look like adding Tobias to the team, what JB envisions for Tobias. And I just think that's so cool to kind of see how committed JB was before even signing on the dotted line. And that to me proves a lot, that he has a vision for this Pistons team, him and Trajan, while also wanting so desperately to get a guy like Tobias, knowing that getting a guy like Harris is crucial for this Detroit Pistons team to win. And I just think that's so cool. That was my second thing I wanted to mention. And then third is, when asked about the defensive side of the ball and what JB kind of envisions, and you kind of mentioned this before, he was talking about certain scenarios with certain players on the defensive end. And I loved how he just had specific answers to questions the media gave him. And he's breaking down certain defensive scenarios with Jaden Ivey being able to guard the opposing starting point guard rather than Cade Cunningham, maybe he going to a small forward defensively, how Cade's kind of proven in the past how he's a little bit slower to guard certain point guards defensively. And I just loved how he had such specific answers, and he seemed so thought out. And Ryan, like you said, Monty Williams didn't really give us much of that last season. Honestly, what they talked about a lot in the introductory press conference was how much he's getting paid. And they were addressing how, Monty Williams was trying to convince the media that he didn't just sign with the Pistons because of the money. Well, we might see some lies there now, a year later. But JB just seems very, well-spoken. Ryan, what were some of your thoughts on how direct he was when guys like Dwayne Casey and Monty Williams were a little bit more political in that way?
So obviously, JV comes from a basketball family. His dad, longtime NBA head coach. JV played college basketball at Minnesota and had Oregon State, I believe, too. But he was a basketball player himself. He obviously didn't stick in the NBA, went undrafted in 2001, never played, but then started coaching really early on with his dad in Charlotte. And him being direct, it makes sense to me because he has probably arguably one of the hardest paths to becoming a head coach out of anyone. And that's crazy to say because he has a basketball background, played college basketball at a high level. His dad was a longtime NBA head coach, like I mentioned. And so you would think that maybe he wouldn't have had such a hard time getting to a head coaching role,
Right.
especially with how much experience he's had. But I think the experience has helped him to not only just build the person, but build the character that he has, and being bold and just saying what his plans are. Because, like, obviously, okay. So Langdon, and there was a couple questions brought up with Langdon and Bickerstaff today, and Bickerstaff pretty much went out and said, yeah, Langdon and Tom Gores and everybody here in Detroit showed to me that they wanted me here. That's something that Cleveland didn't show me. And when I heard that, I'm sitting there going, yep, this makes sense on why he's so bold right now, is because he's wanted here by everybody. And he feels so comfortable with that situation that he's like, okay, what if I tell them X, Y, and Z? Who cares? Like, they want to know. everybody wants to know. So
Right.
to me, him being bold is just him being more comfortable with everybody around him and his surroundings. But then also he has the basketball knowledge to literally spit facts on this and that nonstop. So to me, the boldness, it was just out of comfort, and I loved it because, like you said, Monty, and then even Dwayne Casey held back a little bit. Dwayne Casey, I have no issues with. He was never bad. But
Oh, no.
Monty just he did he got heated about certain things as we saw this past season, and he then talked about it a little bit more in those post game conferences. But outside of that, he never really explained what his plans were. When we and everybody in the media asking him, so why is Jaden Ivey coming off the bench? Do you not like him? All that stuff. Like Monty never even answered those questions too. And then fast forward to the end of the season, Monty pretty much was like, "Yeah, I probably should have started Ivy. That was a mistake. I just didn't know how to build the rotation." And then it's like, okay, you don't know what you're doing. But JB Bickerstaff from this press conference put his foot down, and to me shows he knows what he's talking about, what his plans are, what Langdon's plans are, and when I listened to Bickerstaff talk, it felt to me as if I was listening to Trajan Langdon talk. And then
Mm.
what Langdon was talking about, like what he's wanting to do and developing this team. And like JB Bickerstaff made mention that, like with Cade Cunningham, and you mentioned the defense, he wants Cade to not only be a great offensive player, but he thinks Cade could be an elite two-way player, offense and defense. And he wants to make like an emphasis on making Cade a two-way player and really develop that. And just, I don't know. I have so many thoughts going on in my head right now because of how JB Bickerstaff handled the media and breaking down like literally everything right before us. And it was just such a cool process to witness and listen to, because whenever you get into the room with a basketball mind, it's always fun. It's always fun listening to them and their stories. But JB Bickerstaff, what he explained to us today is something that Monty Williams has never done before in his career, and what other coaches are a little bit hesitant to do just so they don't get hurt in the long run. But JB Bickerstaff, I'm giving you an A plus on an introductory press conference.
So JB kind of addressed the elephant in the room in a way, and that's position battles. And we know that with the fifth pick, just a couple of weeks ago, we picked up Ron Holland, who is a very similar player to Asar Thompson. So there right away is a position battle. And then we look at the point guard position and what's going to happen there with Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, Marcus Sasser, and what can Marcus Sasser do in summer league. And then you have, in the center position with Reed and bringing in Reed recently with Jalen Duren, and he doesn't want to give minutes away. And it seemed at times Monty Williams didn't really have a reason or a thought process between who was getting what minutes, and he never really addressed that side of the coin. And I liked how JB immediately said, I want players to earn minutes. There's going to be position battles. I'm going to be addressing players directly about position battles and earning minutes. And I think that was just a great thing. And then to that effect, he talked about how he wants Cade and Jaden Ivey, either one, always on the floor, starting games and then closing games together. And that was one thing that we got extremely frustrated with Monty Williams is, okay, the starting lineup would go out there, they'd play the first 8 minutes of the first quarter, and then there'd be all bench players in there. And we're like, why isn't at least Duren, Cade, Ivy on the floor trying to help lead this second unit? And we would start the game, we're competing, maybe down by 5. We're always losing at some point last season. And then the bench would come in, and then we would go down double digits, and then put us so far behind that it's hard to come back later in the game. And so I think that was a great point. JB recognized right away that we're going to have Cade or Jaden always on the floor, either one, and then have them start and close games together. That was a huge thing. And, a part of me, JB said such perfect answers. Part of me is like, okay, what's going on here? He's doing everything Monty didn't do. But I think that also proves the point that JB is very locked in. And that's another thing I noticed in the press conferences. He just seems very focused and locked in for a guy that was going to take a year off after getting dismissed with the Cleveland Cavaliers. That's just to show you how when your father is, deep into the basketball world and a great mindset for a coach, that you just develop that he was a naturally born leader for an NBA team or a basketball team. Ryan, what are some of your other thoughts on like rotation? And he just seemed to have the answers for everything.
Yeah, when you mentioned about Cade and Jaden Ivey, either one of them being on the floor together, or one of them being on the floor at all times, to me that made note of, okay, Jaden Ivey is not going anywhere,
Yep.
because he put an emphasis on mentioning Ivey and Cade, and then he even went as far as to really compliment Ivey and pretty much call him an elite player, an elite prospect. And to me, I mean, there's been so much speculation this offseason, or heading into this offseason rather, where it's like, okay, Ivy could be moved. And then you even have Tim Hardaway Jr. coming in, you have Tobias Harris coming in, and then all the questions are kind of flaring up again. And now there's speculation once again on Brandon Ingram, on Ivy and Stu being moved for Ingram, and now this and that. And there's just so much going on around Jaden Ivey. But then JB Bickerstaff is like calling Ivy out and praising him, calling him an elite prospect, saying what his plans are for him, along with Cade Cunningham. So clearly, it's evident that Ivy is a part of the plan, trade and a part of Trajan Langdon's plan. So that's that. At least we know Cade and Ivy, and even Duran for sure. And then actually, Bickerstaff even made note of Stu. So I don't know if Stu's going anywhere based off that now either. But there's at least 4 guys right there alone who've all been credited by JB Bickerstaff in this press conference. And to me, that shows you. And actually, he made note of it too. He was pretty much along the lines of, I wasn't even hired yet, and I was doing a deep dive into our roster and going over what everybody's strengths are, what their weaknesses are, watching tape. I mean, I played against them 4 times for how many years? And so not only am I studying that, but I'm also studying like just everything. And to me, that excited me a lot. So much so, like, he was breaking down game film of this past season when he wasn't even hired yet. And that's how excited he was to get into this. And that's something that I'm sure Monty did from time to time heading into his job with the Pistons. And I know for a fact any coach does that to start out. But the way JB Bickerstaff has his head on his shoulders and really is committed to this Pistons team and wanting to develop this team and knows that there is something special here. Like, he had a meeting with Tom Gores and Armtellem and everybody, and he walked away from it going, okay, there's something special here. And even listening to Trajan Langdon and his vision, and talking with Cade and talking with a couple of the other players, like, JB Bickerstaff is so much involved already in such a short period of time, and he's just so excited to hit the ground running. And that's something to me that stands out between him and Monty. And just as rotation goes, obviously, as I mentioned, Ivy and Cade, like, that was talked about a lot. Cade being talked about as a two-way elite player, being offensive minded and defensive minded, because JV Bickerstaff made note, like, Cade has the length to play at this position, to play great defensively rather. And then, like, I don't know as far as rotation what that'll look like. I mean, every person can speculate pretty much at this point. But I trust JB Bickerstaff more so than I trust Monty Williams, and I'm very excited for this upcoming season.
So we talked about how JB addressed the media and some of his answers and things he touched on. Now I kind of want to talk about Trajan Langdon and where his head was at when looking for the next Pistons head coach and what brought him to JB Bickerstaff and ultimately signing him as the next Pistons coach. This quote from clickondetroit.com goes to say, quote, "There are a lot of different characteristics we looked for when getting a new coach that we wanted to hire. And that was probably about 15 things. Pistons president Trajan Langdon said, quote, experience definitely is one of those things we needed. You want somebody to come in and hit the ground running. And that's exactly what we've seen JB do. And something that Langdon hit on was how when he first reached out to JB Bickerstaff, it was 11 o'clock at night and JB answered the phone. And this is a guy that was more than likely on vacation, enjoying his time off with his family. And he sees a random call from Trajan Langdon. He's like, I'm going to pick this up and see where this goes. And then 3.5 weeks later, he has a job as the head coach with the Detroit Pistons. And that's the kind of guy you want as a coach, a guy that is going to answer the phone at 11 p.m. at night from an NBA executive. The other thing is what I really liked Trajan, something I liked that he said was just 4 weeks ago, he sat down with the staff and he said, it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time, but we're going to get this motor running, motor revving. And he said that him and JB were sitting down talking about their schedules, what it's going to look like in Las Vegas, when they're going to meet in meetings, what players they're going to talk with. And Trajan Langdon said a priority on his schedule during his time in Vegas is to get some of the staff to Vegas and get them to sit down for a dinner and basically thank them for all the work they've done so far. And I think that Pistons front office and employees have been waiting for a GM like this and a coach like this to rally around. You never heard Troy Weaver talk about any of the Pistons employees and the efforts they're putting in behind the scenes. And then the third press conference we see with Trajan Langdon, he's already thanking them for their great work. I think we have a leader on our hands, Ryan.
No, I definitely think so. Again, like I mentioned, like listening to JB Bickerstaff, I could listen to him all day. Trajan Langdon, same thing. Great basketball minds right there. And the fact, and I'll go back to your note of answering the phone at 11 o'clock. I would not answer the phone at 11 o'clock at night unless it was like you. But that's about it. I guess my family too, but outside of that, I'm not answering the phone that late. Like I'll send it to voicemail. I'm not answering that. So props to JB Bickerstaff for answering the phone at 11 o'clock at night. But it's just when you think about what Langdon and what JB Bickerstaff even went along to say the same thing as Langdon did of having a continuing thread. There we go, continuing thread, like from the front office ownership down all the way to the trainers. And JB Bickerstaff made note of that too. And he just, like you said, he hit everything on the head. He nailed all these questions. He had some tough questions thrown his way too, and he answered those with ease. And what he like, just being able to the whole summer league situation. The summer league roster came out the other day. I'm looking up and down on it, and I'm like, "Ooh, I only recognize 3 names, and one of them is not Asar Thompson, but Asar today announced by Trajan that he is fully cleared to play, so that is good. But that's why he wasn't on the summer league rosters, because they pulled him off of that so he could heal. But outside of that, like I'm looking down the list. I'm like Marcus Sasser, okay. Bobby Klintman, who we just drafted, yeah. Ron Holland, okay. And I'm like, off the top of my head, I'd have to see a picture to really understand who everybody is. I noticed Dennis Jenkins, and he was at St. John's this past year, came out of the Rick Pitino system, so good player. But he just actually got signed to a 2-way contract between the Pistons and the Motor City Cruise. So that's one player that we should keep an eye on. But when you sit down and you're praising the staff this early, something that Troy Weaver never did, like you mentioned, like you go back to all the post-game conferences, press conferences, anything with Troy Weaver, and then with Monty Williams. And Troy Weaver, I mean, he was a pretty chill, introverted guy himself, like Trajan. But Trajan's actually talking. Troy never really talked. Troy would go like, well, we got to do this, and well, we got to do that, but that's about it. And then he would just shut up, and that's it. But Trajan is like, even though I don't really want to talk, I'll tell you what you want to know because it's important to you. and what's important to you is important to me. And just the fact that he's just, I feel like Trajan is just doing, I don't, if I were to grade how he's done so far, I'm giving it an A plus plus, but that's bold considering this is very early into his career with the Pistons. But the same thing with JB Bickerstaff and the fact that they're flying out to San Diego to meet and talk about Tobias Harris, to do all this recruiting even before you're getting hired. There's so much to even break down from this introductory press conference alone that it's just like everything that you wanted to hear, you heard. And I just, like I said before, there's just so many thoughts going through my head that I'm like, but no, I think what JB Bickerstaff and Langdon have planned, I see a great future ahead for this Pistons team.
So one last thing on Trajan Langdon is I have to note it because he addressed bringing in the vets to this young Detroit Pistons team and Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., and of course, Tobias Harris. And JB really appreciated that move because I think he likes the thought of having that almost safety net for this Detroit Pistons team. JB kind of mentioned throwing a lot of these young stars, future stars, into the water and seeing if they're going to sink or swim. And if they can't swim, these vets give them a safety net to try to continue a path of winning basketball while helping these young players develop. And I think that's going to be crucial for this young team because when we brought on Bojan Bogdanovic 2 seasons ago, I said, I'm not sure how much of a leader he is with that little language barrier. And it proved to be true. I don't think he was very locked in with this roster. We know Tobias Harris loves Detroit. He didn't want to leave. We know that he's talked highly about this young core. I'm excited to see what Tobias Harris can do with affecting each and every young individual and seeing what he can add to Cade Cunningham's 3-point shooting ability and just having that professionalism, behind the scenes, I think is going to prove to be crucial for this young Pistons team.
Yeah, Tobias Harris has been here and done that with Detroit. He's handled the media, he's handled the city, he embraced it all. And there's not a lot of players that last long in Detroit anymore, really. I mean, the longest tenured player for the Pistons right now is Isaiah Stewart. And then even before that, it was Andre Drummond, but Andre Drummond's been gone for a while now too. But the point remains, Tobias never wanted to leave. And he made a post thanking Detroit for embracing him once again on Instagram. And he's hit the ground running. He's so excited. Like I saw on a story on Instagram the other day, pretty much congratulating Cade on the contract extension and tagging him. And I'm sitting there going like, wow, that was actually really cool. Like, yeah. There's not a lot of players that'll go out there and do that. But the fact that Tobias is putting an emphasis on building these connections with all the guys already is just so cool to me. And what he'll bring to this team, I made note of that as we break down. Go check out, if you haven't already, the recent episode where we break down the new additions with Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Malik Beasley. I pretty much went along the lines of, I am more excited for the overall person and leader of Tobias Harris coming in than I am the player. And the player is fantastic. But the person, the leader, is going to help build this team. And JB Bickerstaff made note of that. Trajan Langdon made note of that when talking about the additions of Tobias Harris and the others. They made note, like, we want these guys to help build these players up and have all positivity all the time. And not only are they being positive and uplifting these players, but whenever it gets down bad and we need guys to step up, Tobias Harris is going to step up and get you a bucket. Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to step up and get you a bucket. Malik Beasley is going to step up and give you a bucket. So the point remains, like, he wanted to bring in these vets to emphasize leadership and creating and establishing a culture. And Tobias Harris and the leader he is, and you go to every single stop he's been at, between Orlando to Detroit to LA with the Clippers to the 76ers, and then now back to Detroit. He's always been in that leadership role, And I think we need to emphasize bringing in leaders to establish a winning culture, to even set a culture that Troy Weaver and Monty Williams never did. And what Tobias is going to bring is good, high character basketball and a great attitude. And I'm excited for it.
That will do it for today's special edition episode reacting to JB Bickerstaff's introductory press conference with the media. Make sure to check out this week's episode, our new additions episode, where we break it down the newly acquired Detroit Pistons players. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.